Professor Wiseguy here, and I am so confused. You see, in my day, you knew what to call a woman. If she wasn't married, you called her Miss. Once she got married, you called her Mrs. It was simple and clear, and that's the way it had been for 1,000,000 years. Then these pesky feminists come along and mess everything up. Wait a minute! Back, troglodyte, back! He gets out sometimes. But I will admit there is sometimes confusion over this whole Mr., Mrs., Miss, Ms., and so forth. For men, it's simple. You're Mr. on the day you're born, and you're Mr. on the day you die. But really, that's not what we do. Would you refer to Mr. Kevin McAllister in Home Alone? No. In fact, the most prominent American etiquette guide says that he should have been called Master Kevin McAllister up to the age of 12. From 12 to 18, he'd just be plain Kevin McAllister, while at age 18, he gets the right to vote and a Mr. slapped onto his name. Simple, right? Logical, right? I have no idea where all that came from, but that's not what is confusing me. I just don't understand women, or at least what we call them. In my day, oh, there he comes again. When I was a child, traditional forms held. A woman was Miss until she got married and then Mrs. afterward. But that tradition wasn't as old or as fixed as we might think. It was only in the 1800s that this whole Miss, Mrs. thing came to signify marital status above all else, like it has in our traditional usage. And then there were complications and variations that we wouldn't recognize today, even if we are traditionalists. By the way, why is it Mrs. spelled with an R? Is the R silent? What's up with that? Apparently, back in the day, all women were addressed using the honorific, and that's what you call one of these words, or title, mistress. As people are apt to do, speakers sort of rubbed the sharp edges off that word, mistress, and got it down to Mrs. In context, apparently nobody complained, but the R in the abbreviation stuck around. If you're wondering about my source for the whole mistress abbreviation thing, I went to the granddaddy of all dictionaries, the Oxford English Dictionary, which defined the word as, quote, a title of courtesy prefixed to the surname of a married woman having no higher or professional title. It goes on to confirm the origin of the word and give examples of its use dating back to 1485. They're nothing if not thorough. I used another nifty source to look at the use of that word, Mrs., across the ages. The Google Ngram viewer graphs the frequency of words in the books collected in the cleverly titled Google Books. Since there are a lot of books in that database, these graphs can give us a good insight for how often a word is used, at least in printed language, across the years. If you look at the graph, you'll see that the word was in fairly rare usage as far back as 1600. In fact, those lowest points on the graph have the word appearing only 2 or 3 times for every 1,000,000 printed words. That means you'd probably cover a dozen or more books without encountering Mrs. That, however, could be misleading. In that day, before novels were widely published, the word might have been in fairly wide use, but just not showing up in the books of theology or natural history or political science that made up a huge amount of the books of that day and are included in that database. We do clearly see that Mrs. had its day of glory around 1899 when it shows as 0.019% of the words in books. That's roughly 2 words for every 10,000 appearing on the page. In a typical novel of 50,000 words, Mrs. would show up 10 times. That, of course, presupposes that the word was equally distributed across all the printed books, which it almost certainly wasn't. We'll note that the word suffered a precipitous decline in usage across the second half of the 20th century, bottoming out in 1999. Surprisingly, though, we seem to be experiencing a veritable Mrs. Renaissance since 2000. What could account for that? Is there an undercurrent of traditionalism driving the thing? Now, digging a little bit into the results, I realize that this post-2000 boom in Mrs. can probably be laid at the feet of big data. Google Books includes thousands of obscure titles long out of print and long out of copyright. This post-2000 resurgence seems at least largely attributable to a bunch of old books, maybe ones from around 1899, that have been added to the data set since 2000. But enough about Mrs. Let's talk about Miss. You can probably guess that Miss is another shortening of mistress. So really, what's the difference between Miss and Mrs.? They both came from the same origin. The difference is just in what we understand them to mean. Meanwhile, mistress has taken on a rather unsavory meaning of the other woman. I can casually refer to my wife as my missus, but I'll raise some eyebrows if I call her my mistress. And not to digress too much, but isn't it intriguing that a married man can have a mistress, but we don't really have a parallel word for the secret partner of a married woman? As I was saying earlier, things used to be simpler with the whole Mrs. structure, even if it wasn't as ancient as we wanted to believe. But then, along came Gloria Steinem in 1972 to mess up a good thing. She latched onto the idea that all women should be called Ms., suggesting that marital status should not be the defining feature of a person, or more specifically, a woman. After all, I was Mr. before my wedding and Mr. the day after. What's fair for the gander ought to be fair for the goose. Steinem started a magazine under that name, Ms., and the whole thing took off. I should note that Ms. without the period is the common usage in most of the English-speaking world, while in the US and Canada, the only places that really matter, we add the period. Am I being disloyal to my continent to say that that period is stupid? After all, Ms. is not an abbreviation for anything, unless Ms. is going back to calling all women mistress. Regardless, if you're writing for a North American audience, add the period. Wikipedia suggests that Ms. was an acceptable abbreviation for mistress back in the 17th and 18th century. But the OED, and that's the Oxford English Dictionary, what it's called by its friends, it only traces the title back to 1901. A couple of other examples appear before Steinem popularized the word, but then it blew up in the 1970s and beyond. The Ngram search for this term, however, is muddied by the fact that MS is a common abbreviation for manuscript found in various literary and religious works. Also, MS, multiple sclerosis, is an abbreviation often written without periods. So confusing. Some traditionalists have complained that Ms. is an ugly-sounding term. Honestly, I have no idea why they'd say that. Mrs., Miss, Ms. It's not like we're calling Mrs. Mullins Glurp Mullins. It's an easy term to say and it avoids confusion. What's not to like? But I can't say the same about this term. If you're not up to date on that, this term is a non-gendered replacement for all the words we've been talking about. It exists, and I don't like it. It exists, and I don't like it. In my day, there were men and there were women, and we were all happy about that. My displeasure with this term is not that guy talking again. I just find this term clunky. Notice that I haven't pronounced it yet. Why? People apparently can't even agree on how to say it. Is it mix, mex, mux? Another option is MX. Those just all strike me as ugly. Maybe we should go with human Mullins, although some people don't like human since it includes man in it. What about being Mullins? Entity Mullins? Comrade Mullins? I'd be more inclined to drop the honorific altogether. Just go with Mullins. I don't think I'm just being a curmudgeon to complain that Mix Mex Mux is ugly. To me, it's like the efforts we've made in recent years to employ more inclusive language. A student should choose an honorific that he/she approves. He/she, that's ugly. Heck, it sounds violent. We could always do she or he, but that's not a lot better. It doesn't take a brilliant writer, though, to come up with something better. Students should choose honorifics they approve. It's simple and elegant and not ugly. Nobody's slashing anybody. My hope is that if there's really a need for the sort of term that Mix Mex Mux fills, then we'll come up with something that sounds a little closer to the way people actually want to talk. Mix Shakespeare, Mex Austin, and Mux Wolf would want us to do nothing less. That's all I have. If you have comments on this, put them in the comments below and do all the nice things that we like to do to videos. But for right now, get out of here.